My name is Alison Mitchell and I will be chairing this session. I will speak in English. One of my colleagues here on the panel will speak in English and others will speak in French. My title is Convergence and Divergence in Doctoral Training, Implications for the Overall Development of Researchers. First of all, I thought I would just give you a little bit of information about Vitae and where we are in this arrangement. I think I need to... There we are. Very briefly, that is how we work. We are a not-for-profit organisation and we work around 5 strands. One is about policy and strategy. The other one is about institutional provision. I'll talk a little bit about that today. Support for those who train and develop researchers. We work directly with researchers and we conduct a whole series of evaluations to demonstrate impact. The impact of investment in researcher development and the impact of researchers themselves in their work. What I think is of interest today is our approach. No, you see, I knew this would happen. You have to shout. If I don't change the slide, you have to tell me. Here we are. That we work developing researchers now across the world. We originated in our work with the UK higher education institutions funded by the research councils, and we now work across the world developing and training researchers. And we also gather, from a UK perspective, but more internationally as well, lots of information about the career pathways of researchers, data by different disciplines, and also some advice to give to principal investigators and supervisors about what the career possibilities might be within particular areas. Moving on, I thought, taking a global perspective on this, that I should start by looking at what the Global Research Council say. Global Research Council is an organisation, I think it's about 18, 20 research councils across the world. And they have some very clear statements of intent. So when we look at global activity, as was said earlier, we find a sense of convergence. And it says increasingly the research community is linked to a much larger global framework involving the circulation of talent. And that's what we're going to talk about today as the focus of this conference. And then beneath that is the commitment that those research councils globally are making to the professional development of researchers. These are the kind of activities that group of research councils who are funders see as being important in terms of excellence in doctoral training. And I think I would say that across the world there is what I would call a convergence in ambition, aspiration for excellence in researcher training. And now I think the agenda has shifted from excellence in research conducted by researchers to excellence in research and in researchers. And so the professional development of researchers across the world who create the research has become important to many, many organisations. And you can see in that slide that there's a very similar set of aims there about excellence, about mobility, which was spoken about already, acquisition of a diverse set of skills and outreach, placements, so on. Nurturing research integrity, I will come back to that, a high quality research environment, and this is going to be achieved by sharing good practice. And that's the ambition on convergence. If I look at, and only mentioned the European Principles for Innovative Doctoral Training, you can see that it's very similar in what it asks and expects the European countries to achieve. Exposure to industry, international networking, transferable skills training, interdisciplinary research, and then the last three are in, if you like, the environment, about quality and so on. So across Europe, there's been quite a growth in doctoral training centres, centres of doctoral training. It's coming together. The whole concept of development as part of a cohort, a group of researchers sharing best practice, is the way that we see a lot of the funding going. It's not necessarily the case in other parts of the world, but that is very much how it is conducted in Europe. So I just wanted to introduce you to a slightly different example, which is from work that we're doing in Africa. It's called the Circle Project, and we're working with 29 institutions across 9 countries in Africa. And I just wanted to point out to you that actually the ambition in Africa is very similar as another case study. So we have a European driver, we have an African driver, we have an Australian driver, and they're all moving towards this concept of excellence in doctoral training. So I just wanted to draw out there for you about networking, flag up mentoring, which is seen as very important these days, and researcher development programmes. What that begins to say across all of those case studies is there's a shift in the nature of the relationship between the supervisor and the researcher. It's more advanced in some places, but others. And the concept of the mentoring supervisor, who has responsibility for the development of the researcher as well as the research output, is coming around. And there are many, many examples across the world of that. And particularly in African countries, it is seen as very much an important way of raising research capacity. So a lot of investment's being put into that. In the UK, it's the same. About 70%, over 70% of our UK institutions have mentoring schemes for researchers. Now that leaves questions for institutions about how you develop supervisors who may or may not wish to be mentoring in terms of professional development, how comfortable they feel in supporting researchers in moving out of academia into other careers. And if the supervisors are not providing that support, then who is within the institution? So it leaves lots of questions across the world. Across the world, there are tensions. So we say there is convergence in terms of that ambition for excellence in research and developing researchers. But on the ground, where it happens, it's not the same. The realities are different. Here we are in Europe, in certain parts of Western Europe and in America, where there's a critical emphasis on, is there an oversupply of researchers? Whereas in African countries, there's an undersupply of researchers. So that's a constant that's not a common theme across that convergence. That then leads to a much stronger emphasis on employability within our countries, moving out of academia, whereas in the African countries that we work with, in the African institutions, it's about research capacity building and retaining researchers. It's different models with the same ambition. So in our countries, we have a lot of discussion about transferable skills, whereas in other countries, it's a discussion about building high-quality research skills and working in collaboration internationally to help to develop those research skills. So again, it's a different model. We have this idea of movement to other sectors is encouraged. It is seen as a benefit in some countries to have doctoral researchers across business, and I thought it was very interesting the number of researchers in the OECD who actually work in business, broadly speaking, compared to education. Whereas in other countries, the primary concern is the retention of researchers by creating the research infrastructure to retain the researchers within those institutions. And a lot of the work that we're doing in Circle is actually to help the institutions create a research environment where researchers who go on secondments will come back and progress their career within that institution, so there is not a loss of talent within that particular institution. I think the other interesting thing is around who are researchers. It came up, fantastic question this morning, but who are researchers? And across the world, there is no consistent model. One of the interesting imperatives, I say in the UK, not necessarily in our research-intensive universities, but in others, but also in our African colleagues' institutions, is actually, as quickly as possible, to develop staff who are teaching to become active and productive researchers. That's a different model to the linear model of coming through from a first degree to a second degree, a bit of sort of postdoc period and moving on. And within that, there's a certain urgency for those who have achieved a PhD, a doctorate, to very quickly supervise others. Whereas certainly in the UK, we have quite a structured process of being postdoc, first supervisor, second supervisor, first supervisor, and so on. So there's a quality assurance. And there isn't time in many emerging research countries for that to happen. The last one I mentioned there is about collaboration. In our Circle African countries institutions, the collaboration is for local impact. These world challenges that we collaborate across the world on actually impact within their own countries and very locally. And so they need help for that. Whereas from our point of view, looking at global challenges, we tend to be creating distant impact. And what that has meant is that African researchers have a very sharp and acute understanding of community engagement, something which I don't think we in Western Europe have at the moment in the same way. So again, there are many lessons we can learn from researchers across the world. So my question at the end of this is, what does this mean, both globally and locally, for the development of international researchers? When researchers come to our institutions, how well do we understand where they have come from, what conditions they've been working under, and where they are going to, and how well do we prepare them for those journeys back to their home countries and their home institutions? And we were talking about the importance of understanding alumni, diaspora, and understanding the needs of international researchers while they are with us. And that is something I would say in the UK we've just started to look at as being an important aspect of our global presence. So I've just said there are lots of problems that are common. This is a quote. It's just to say that one of the, I think, major challenges across all that is the development of early career researchers for the next stage in their career. I won't dwell on it. I'll just leave that as a marker. And about the development of leadership amongst researchers. And I'll come to that in a minute. In terms of cultural differences, Singapore's statement on research integrity. My interpretation of research integrity may not be yours. How do we work together? And we have instances where two researchers have worked together, they've agreed to publish, but actually the publication can only be referenced as a quality journal in one of the countries and not in the other. So when researchers work together and institutions put in collaborative agreements and there's an agreement about the research that will be conducted, there also needs to be a career development discussion between researchers so that the collaboration benefits all the parties who are working on the research. Just very briefly, I just want to introduce the Vitae Researcher Development Framework. Some of you will be familiar with it. It has 4 domains. It's been developed by researchers for researchers, and it's in use across the world. There's a conceptual framework about the competencies of researchers. I've got some postcards here, and you can get all this from our website, so I won't dwell on it. It has the 4 domains, it has subdomains, and it has a wide variety of descriptors. 63 descriptors, okay? It's quite a lot. It's a lot. It's what successful researchers see as being the competencies that they need to develop to be those successful researchers. And what I wanted to sort of just focus on here is, now you won't be able to read this, I just suggest you go to the website to get it, but we've looked at the competencies and the skills to be the global researcher, to be the mobile researcher. And there are particular things about working with others, changing from one country to the other, about your own personal competencies that's worth having a look at. And within that, I just want to flag in that red circle there, there's a whole area about global citizenship. How are we going to be as global researchers, citizens of the global research world? What does that mean for our own professional development? So, my final slide is from work that we've recently completed, looking at what research leaders' guidance that they give to others following their path. And my question to you is, how will you develop your career in a global research environment? And these are the elements that research leaders have suggested. There are many more. The reports will be published in the next couple of weeks, so just keep an eye on the website. Working with others, building your network internationally, building your research profile internationally. How does that work when you're working with those international research collaborators? Are you making the right decisions? Are they making the right decisions about your collaborations? Achieving a work-life balance, especially challenging when you're working in a globally mobile environment. Do you take your whole family with you? How do you work? How do you do it? Do you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to have the call? I can see some of you are smiling. You've been there, you've done it. You know, and finding mentors and role models. And if that relationship with your supervisor is not perhaps working for you very well, then perhaps you should look for mentors elsewhere. So there we are. That's a global perspective for you on research and development. Thank you.